A very debated topic comes up in Christian circles, and I want to take a moment to share my thoughts. It is a two-part question, and I will give a two-part answer. I start with the first question. Are Christians expected to keep the fourth commandment? On the surface, I think the answer is clear. Yes, we should keep the Sabbath and continue the Jewish tradition. It's one of the 10 commandments, right? It only makes sense to obey the commands of God as His people. But when we look deeper into the scriptures, we see clearly the expectation for New Testament believers. What is the fourth commandment? Deuteronomy 5:12 says, "Observe the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work." Where did this commandment originate, and what exactly does this teach us? The commandment simply teaches us to keep the Sabbath holy. Each seventh day belonged to the Lord and would not be a work day, but one set apart and holy for rest and for time devoted to the worship of Yahweh. The term Sabbath is derived from to rest or cease from work. The historical precedent for such a special observance was the creation week, a span of time equal to what humanity copied in practice. The Sabbath day should have reminded the worshiper that the God whom he or she praised had indeed made everything in both realms of existence in 6 24-hour days. Moses linked the observance of the Sabbath with Israel's exodus from Egypt and specified that this was why Israel was to keep it. It was a Jewish tradition to observe Saturday as the Sabbath. But what about the New Testament church? Are we to observe the Jewish Sabbath? When I read the early chapters of the book of Acts, I noticed that the first Christians were mostly Jewish. When those outside the Jewish community began to receive the gift of salvation through Jesus, the Jewish Christians had a problem to deal with. Were the Gentiles held to the same expectations as the Jews? What aspects of the law and Jewish tradition should they be instructed to obey? I turned to Acts 15 and read all about the Jerusalem Council when the apostles met to discuss such issues. The decision was read by the senior pastor, James, the brother of Jesus, and this is what he said. "My judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood." This says nothing about keeping the Jewish Sabbath. Furthermore, you will find the command for keeping the Jewish Sabbath nowhere in the New Testament, whereas the other 9 commandments are there. In fact, the command to keep the Sabbath is nullified according to Colossians 2:16 through 17. The Apostle Paul wrote, "Therefore let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ." Keeping the Sabbath was not one of those commands the apostles felt was necessary to force on Gentile Christians. If God commanded the church to observe the Sabbath day, I think the apostles would have included it. Actually, I know they would have included it. Moving on to the second question. What day of the week is the Christian Sabbath? The Christian Sabbath is the first day of the week. Christians call it the Lord's Day. Acts 20 verse 7 says, "On the first day of the week, when we gathered together to break bread, Paul talked with them, intending to depart on the next day, and he prolonged his speech until midnight." This passage clearly tells us that the early church gathered on the first day of the week. The Apostle John writes from the island of Patmos in Revelation 1:10, he said, "I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet." So what is the Lord's Day? This phrase appears in many early Christian writings and refers to Sunday, the day of the Lord's resurrection. And how do we know this? Matthew 28:1 tells us. It says, "Now after the Sabbath, which was Saturday, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, which is Sunday, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb to see that Jesus had risen from death." The Sabbath officially ended with sundown on Saturday. This event, described by the Apostle Matthew, occurred the morning after the Sabbath, which was Sunday, also known as the Lord's Day, the day Christians celebrate the Christian Sabbath. Based on all of this text, it's clear that Sunday worship is appropriate. I close with this. Is there anything wrong with worshiping on Saturday, the Jewish Sabbath? Absolutely not. But here's the bigger point. We should worship God every day, not just on Saturday or Sunday. We must remember that there is freedom in Christ. Should a Christian practice Sabbath keeping, that is, not working on Saturdays? Well, if a Christian feels that conviction, then sure. However, those who choose to practice Saturday Sabbath keeping should not judge those who do not keep a Saturday Sabbath. Please don't judge me and other Christians who gather to worship God on Sunday, considering you have no biblical support for it. Guys, drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts.